Welcome to Operation Record. I'm Kim Tomey and I'm going to be your hostess today. Today we're interviewing Mr. Ralph Weaver. He's a veteran of foreign wars in the Pacific Theater. Mr. Weaver, where were you first introduced into the war?
To the war?
Mm-hmm.
You mean actual combat in the Pacific?
Yes.
The island of Bougainville on Solomon Island.
Okay, well, would you like to point it out on the map?
Well, this is the Solomon Islands, and the Guadalcanal, we use it for a staging area. We came from New Caledonia down here, up to Guadalcanal, and then from there we invaded Bougainville. Mm-hmm. I think it was the 1st of November of 1943 when Bougainville was invaded.
Okay. Then where did you go after this?
Well, when we came back from Bougainville, we returned to Guadalcanal, which we had a base camp set up there. Mm-hmm. And we had a week or two's rest, and we got replacements, and we trained again. And our next operation was up what they call the St. Matthews Group, a little island up there in Emerald Island. And we weren't there very long. That was probably in March of 44, I imagine. Mm-hmm. And we came back then, back to Guadalcanal, and got replacements again, and trained. The next operation was all the way up to the Marianas, Guam, which was, I think, was invaded sometime in July of 1944. And probably in August of 44, back to Guadalcanal, and replacements and retrained, and then all the way up to Okinawa, which was invaded the first day of April of 45.
Okay. How many, did you invade Okinawa more than once?
Yes. The regiment I was with, 4th Marine Regiment, sometime the first part of June of 45, we had been in the outskirts of Naha, and they pulled us out of the line and gave us replacements. And some of these replacements had been in the States when we landed. They flew them over there for replacements because we were really hurting for replacement. And then we invaded down below Naha Peninsula down there, and we invaded down there, made another landing on Okinawa, and went up along this airfield up here. Mm-hmm. And I participated in that, 4 or 5 days before I was wounded, on the 7th of June, and that was all the war for me.
Okay. You were wounded twice?
Twice.
Where were you? What was your other?
First time I was wounded on Guam, 27th July.
Okay. You were in a total of 4 operations.
Four campaigns.
Okay. Tell me in detail a little bit about each.
Well, they varied some. Like when you got in the Solomon Islands, it was jungle fighting. Mm-hmm. And some of it referred to as guerrilla warfare. Mm-hmm. There was no such thing as frontal assaults like you have in Europe or later on that we participated in Okinawa, because it was jungle. You couldn't see very far. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was patrol work. And take patrols out, and the Japs would ambush you, and you'd ambush them. And you could have some close fighting on the beaches where there was more open ground, but most of it was jungle. Mm-hmm. And in the Solomons. Then we got to Guam. Well, some of it was jungle, but it was more civilized island. There was more open places. There was roads and the coconut groves and stuff like that. It was a little different warfare there. Mm-hmm. But it was still not as open as you will find in Europe, or we didn't have the ground to maneuver on. You get on a small island, you don't have the ground to maneuver on like some of them did in Europe. Mm-hmm. And some things we couldn't deploy the tactics they did in Europe. We didn't have areas where we could use massive tanks or something like that, or patent-made runs for miles across Europe. We was sometimes just make gains in yards. They was measured in yards instead of miles. And then Okinawa was entirely different to me. It was new to me. Here I was supposed to be an old veteran of the war, and it was something really different. The beaches there was no opposition on the beaches whatsoever. We landed in Amtrak's, and we lost 2 or 3 men the first day. But they didn't repulse us at the beaches. They didn't even attempt to. They let us land. But after we got on there, it was a different story. The second day, they ambushed our company, and they killed the captain. They annihilated the 2nd platoon, and we cut the island in two. On Okinawa, the narrow neck there, we cut the island in two, and then we went north, my division, and we secured all the northern end. Matabelu Peninsula. I don't know, we killed maybe 3,500, 4,000 Japs up there. And there was 3 Army divisions, and the Marine division went the southern way, you know. I don't think it was 77th and the 95th or 96th and the 27th Army Division, the 1st Marine Division. And they'd be running a lot of opposition on the southern end. So they eventually sent us down there, and we relieved one of the Army divisions on this west coast of Okinawa, Naha, and that's where we fought then, sometime first part of May or first week or two in May, all the way through it. Then we entered the southern lines in Okinawa. And it was more like, well, Manchester writes there about it, more like World War I warfare, you know. And the armies opposed one another, and maybe 50, 60,000 men in the lines at one time on different sides. You know what I mean? The two sides combined, they'd be opposed to one another. And it was a different warfare than the jungle warfare was.
Well, what types of weapons did you use then? Well,
the weapons were basically the same. I carried an M1 Garand rifle on Okinawa. On Guam, I'd carried a BAR, which is a Browning automatic rifle. And we still used the light and heavy machine guns. We used the 60 and 81 millimeter mortars. We had the bazooka, and we had the flamethrower. But we could use tanks better on the southern end. We had flame-throwing tanks, which were really a lifesaver in burning out caves. And then we had access to a lot of air power, you know, and a lot of naval fire for us. We had a lot of naval power laying offshore with battle wagons and stuff, and they'd shell for us one thing or another. But it was just more like, I imagine, World War I combat would have been, or in Europe would have been, the way Okinawa was on the southern end. Because they was defending their homeland. We wasn't very far from Japan, and they fought to the death, and that's the way it was.
Okay. Did you have any spare time at all?
Spare time? Oh, yeah. They would put you in the line for, a week, you know, maybe 4 or 5 days, and usually you stayed there till you was so wore out, you lost enough casualties you couldn't jump off into another attack. Well, then they'd pull you back in the rear area, and you'd maybe get replacements. The units shot up, and you'd get maybe a few replacements and sort of retrain, rest, dry off, and get your clothes washed and cleaned up, and take a bath and shave, one thing or another, and clean your weapons, one thing or another, and you'd have a rest area for 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 days. Hardly over 5 days at the most. And we'd swim if we had the opportunity, and if we could, we'd try to bum a hot meal off of somebody, because most of it came out of a can. One time we was in a rest area, and we bivouacked an artillery outfit. And I guess they felt sorry for us, and they all invited us over for a hot meal, but all it was sea rations warmed up. And we were just eating it cold, but it was warmed up, tasted pretty good. And you lost a lot of weight. You didn't have to worry about weight.
Now, you had a tremendous weight difference when you had been over there a while, didn't you?
Well, most of us contributed to the climate. I had friends one was a professional boxer, a young man, and his name was Nelson, and he had 3 or 4 pro fights before he went in the service. But after he went back home, he could never get in shape to fight anymore. He was curious. There's something about the islands that does it to you. I don't know what. You can't get in shape. And it was hot. I don't know why they trained us there, because it was hot. You'd go out in the morning to train, and before noon, your clothing would be sopping wet from perspiration. And a lot of guys have to take salt tablets, which I never could take a salt tablet. It made me sick. I used table salt. And when I went overseas, I weighed 182 pounds. Probably the best shape of my life. I trained some in the States and good food. But when I got on a hospital ship, when they hoisted me on a hospital ship off of Okinawa, I weighed 135 pounds. So, of course, I contributed some of that to Okinawa, not eating right and the conditions that we were under.
Now, you have a particular story about some money with a hole in it.
Yeah.
Would you tell me about that, please?
Well, on Guam, they sent us to the northern end of Guam, and just for patrol duty. And we were supposed to leave the island at any time, but they sent us up there anyhow. And the Japanese, the island was supposed to be secured, but the Japanese were still running a lot around up there, disorganized. They'd be groups 4 or 5, 10 or 12, 15 or 20 of them running around, and they were still, doing their job, supposed to be fighting the war. And I suppose they were terrorizing the natives and killing stock and ambushing a few colonels and majors in their jeeps and shooting at a few telephone men and communication men, so forth and so on. So they sent us to the northern end, which is pretty rugged. It's brushy and hilly, and they have cliffs that go down to the ocean. So we set a perimeter up, and then we run patrols from that perimeter. And then we also took ambushes out. And we'd find a trail where the trails cross, and there'd be 8 of us, and 2 watch each direction. And we just let the Japs come up that trail, and we just killed them. I mean, people today, they just can't understand it, but that's what the times were. When they come up the trail and they got close enough, we just killed them. We just shot them from ambush. And then we drug them off the side so they wouldn't mess up the ambush for anybody else, because the human body stinks bad, and the flies are bad, and they'll get to blowing him real bad, and you can almost find them. Well, I was carrying a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, and me and a young man by the name of McGannon, we sort of had a thing going on who could put the most rounds in a Jap out of that BAR. And I guess maybe I shouldn't tell this, but it was in times, and we rose to the occasion. And he come in, he'd been on ambush duty, he come in, he said he put 8 rounds in that Jap out of his BAR. Well, my friend Donald Hines said, well, why, we can do better than that. McGannon said, we can do better than that. And I said, yeah, I can do better than that. So in a couple of days or so, Hines and I caught ambush duty. We always laid together. So we laid out there, and I told Hines, I said, now if one comes up here, let me have him. So sure enough, one come up the trail, and I put 12 rounds in him. Or anyhow, that's what it took to fill my magazine. And he had a little blouse he carried, a little blouse on her uniform here, a pocket on her blouse. And he had a billfold there. And he had his money folded, just like you'd fold it in your billfold, a dollar bill. And he probably had 4 or 5 or 6 of them folded. And one of them BAR bullets went plumb through that money, and had left 2 holes. Well, I just kept one piece. We shared our souvenirs. We had a lot of them. Here, you want a piece? This is what he said. And we sent it home. I still have it.
Well, what other souvenirs, if any, did you get?
Oh, I have a Japanese battle flag. They carried them. I guess, they had their friends write things on them, like you write in your yearbook for your friends, and they carried them, and they had little ties where they could tie them on a bayonet and march through these villages. The people on Guam told us that they marched through the villages every once in a while. They had to pray, and they'd prayed their tanks and stuff, just like we did, I suppose. All of them carried them in a pocket or wrapped around their waist or someplace. And, of course, every time we run across a Jap, well, we'd search him for souvenirs. We were souvenir hungry because at that time I could probably got a case of whiskey for that Jap flag if I wanted to trade it off. And we drank anything that splashed. And I got that flag, and I took a few pictures off of some of them, and there was watches gotten off of them. And, of course, they searched us also.
The same thing. Now, were any of these booby-trapped?
They was booby-traps, oh, yeah.
What type of booby-traps did you come across?
They mostly made their booby-traps out of grenades and stuff like that, and explosives, and they'd maybe have it laying under a helmet or a pack or a dead Jap, and you'd roll him over. But they was guys hurt with them. I never was, but usually the guys that got hurt with the booby-traps were the guys that came along behind us, stretcher bearers, stuff like that. And maybe it was a Jap we'd bypass, and maybe a Jap get a chance to booby-trap it or something, Or in a hut or something like that, or in a cave, they'd have something laying in there that you'd want real bad. You'd pick it up and it'd explode on you. But I never lost any men in my squad. I don't know of anybody in our platoon who was lost to booby traps. But they were lost to booby trap. Because we were cautioned and we was told, and we pretty well knew what we were searching. But a lot of the fellows in the rear action line and stuff come along later, they was hurt with booby traps.
Now, this is out in the jungle also, right?
This is jungle and on Okinawa also.
Okay. Now, when you landed in some of these places, were in the shallow water, did they have it also?
They had booby traps? Well, they had their mines. They had land mines. They had personnel mines, and some of them were phosphorus. They'd go off and they'd throw phosphorus up you and all over you, And they had, someplace they try to have what they call tank traps where your amphibious tractors couldn't get up, or Higgins boats, stuff like that. They had the beaches mined. Some places had barbed wire entanglements up.
Mm-hmm.
But usually the barbed wire entanglements were pretty well cleared out from naval gunfire and bombing, so you didn't have much trouble passing through them.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't run into too many of them, but they had them.
Mm-hmm. What kind of contact did you have with the foreigners over there?
With the what? The foreigners?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the natives on Guadalcanal, there was very few natives in our area. The British moved them out, and there was very few there. What was there was British had them up around Henderson Field and places for working parties, I suppose, and they had some native policemen that patrolled the area, and there was still a few Japs on Guadalcanal, and they'd come up through camp every once in a while carrying a head where they'd call a Jap out in the brush, and he'd cut his head off, come up through camp, and they'd take him up to Henderson Field, and the British would pay him for him, I suppose, because they'd be proud of that. Maybe they'd have a sack full of them, 2 or 3 heads in a sack, and they'd take it up there, and we'd stop them and look them over, make sure they were all Japs, and the natives on Guam were real friendly. They were what I would call, they spoke English. They were American citizens, I presume. And they were sort of dark-complected, blue eyes. They were, well, the Spanish had the island and so forth, and they were sort of a mixture of natives and Spanish and probably American. And they were well educated, and they were really helpful. We had no problems with the natives there. And Okinawa, that was where we run into the biggest civilian population. And they knew we were coming. They were told to travel in the daytime so they could be identified as civilians and to stay hidden at night, but they done just the opposite. At nighttime they'd move around. At daytime you wouldn't see very many of them. And a lot of them was killed, not on purpose, but they'd get in the line of fire or they'd be in huts where the enemy was. We told them to stay away from the enemy in pamphlets, but they didn't do it. And I suppose they were trying to help their personnel, their soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was 83 out of one cave one late in the evening. Threw a phosphor grenade in there and got 80-some out of that cave, civilians. Mostly old women and old men and children, And if I hadn't got them out of that cave late that evening, probably that night we would have killed half of them when it came out. We wouldn't know what they were,
Mm-hmm.
And so, but they were civilians killed. They tried to be friendly. They'd offer you food and stuff. We never ate him. We didn't trust him.
Mm-hmm. Can imagine. Now, didn't you take any prisoners?
No prisoners. There was prisoners taken on every island. There was prisoners taken. But the company I was with, the L Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marine Regiment, well, originally it was 3rd Raider Battalion. Our company, the whole time I was with it, approximately 2 years, we never took a prisoner. We did. It was that kind. I can't actually say we ever had an opportunity to take one. When once in a while we'd pin a cave down, maybe Japs in a cave or a pillbox, and you'd have this position isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe intelligence would come up, G2, and they'd want a prisoner. Usually the first 2 or 3 days they'd want a prisoner. And they'd come up with an interpreter, they'd talk to these Japanese, and you'd throw them in a canteen of water, you'd throw them in cigarettes, they'd drink your water, they'd smoke your cigarettes. But they would not come out. So after a while, you had a big bendy bow in your line, holding up, trying to take this pillbox, and where did he come down? Let's move, let's go. So we'd either seal it up or use a flamethrower on them. We'd annihilate them. We never took any. And then sometimes I've talked to other fellows where they'd have a unit, and they'd try the same thing. Well, the Japanese knew that right at the last minute, when we got ready to annihilate them, that they could kill a man or two. We'd have to expose ourselves, or they would cripple a man. So after you talked to them and they wouldn't give up, and then you went ahead and they wounded one of your buddies or killed one of your buddies, you wasn't about to take any prisoners in. And that's kind of where it was. There was no quarter asked and none was given.
Mm-hmm.
It was entirely different in the European War, the fellows I've talked to in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
But there on Saipan at the last, you read accounts at Manchester Writ there was mass suicide by Japanese civilians,
Mm-hmm.
women and children. There was some prisoners taken, and there at the last on Okinawa, there was some of them given up, the Japanese. Some of them were young, some of them were the home guard, some of them was probably the home guard there on Okinawa, and they were young, and some of them were given up at the last. But I wasn't there. I was gone.
Mm-hmm.
But the company I was with, the whole time I was with, we never took a prisoner. And we were proud of the fact. We didn't hide it. If you did come in our unit as a replacement, then we'd tell you we don't take prisoners. And people can't understand that today, but that's the kind of war it was.
Mm-hmm. It must have been hard, you know, you saying several times that you had replacements set in, to become acquainted with someone, become friends with someone, and then maybe that day he'd be gone.
That's true. Manchester writes of it. He said that when new replacements come in, they got a cool reception because they were taking the place of loved ones, which they were. We loved one another. People can't understand that, but we did. We were closer than brothers. I met some of the finest young men that walked the face of the earth. And there's not hardly a day that goes by that I don't think of. I know some guys never talk of the war. And probably the first 20 years, the only one I talked to was my dad. And when my oldest boy got in junior high school and they started studying it and they got me up there and talking, and I really realized what we had done. And I guess the last 10 or 12 years I studied it like you people have in history and read all I could on it and talked to people about it. And I got a brother-in-law who was in the Navy, and we never talked to one another about the war until the last few years. He was on a destroyer off Okinawa in the Philippines. He was a radio man. I talked to him. And I have another friend that fought in Europe, and we changed stories one thing and talk about how it was in Europe and stuff, and the way it was in the Pacific. In Europe, they captured villages and towns, and the biggest thing we ever captured was when Naha, on the outskirts of Naha, that was 66,000 people supposedly. That was the biggest town we ever entered in the Pacific.
Now, when I've heard you talk, you said that sometimes they act like on the TV show MASH, where you have a lot of fun and stuff. Say after you've had a hard battle or just before to break the tension. What kind of things did you joke and laugh about?
Well, after a far fight, we determined a far fight is a lot of small arms far. Fast and furious, maybe last 15 minutes, maybe 3 or 4 hours. You know, and you take casualties on both sides. You may have some mortar fire, but it's really close, you know, your far fights were in the Pacific. And after a far fight was over, and we usually won, although we suffered, we had casualties, we usually won. Why, everything would quiet down, and the adrenaline would still be flowing, you know, and the guys would be sitting around. We didn't bunch up too much, but we sitting around 4, 5, 6 yards apart, and reloading bar clips. And guys would be getting new belts for their machine guns, and we'd be getting new bandoliers to load up our cartridge belts for our M1s, you know, and maybe cleaning the BAR, which was temperamental. It was a gas operated, and it was very temperamental. They had to be clean or they'd jam on you. And refilling canteens and maybe getting new grenades and stuff like that, you know. We'd be sitting around, and we'd be real nervous. I can remember it very now. The adrenaline would still be flowing. Our hands would almost be shaking. We were very frightened. And somebody'd say, "What happened to so-and-so?" Well, if he said he got hit, if the man was wounded, they'd say, "He got hit in the shoulder, or leg, or the arm. He's okay." They carried him out of there. And somebody else said, "Well, what happened to so-and-so?" He'd say, "He got it." And everybody was quiet for a minute because he was dead. When he got it, he was dead. That was the term. And maybe some guys had turned their head. They knew the man real well, and maybe tears would flow. And then some of them would laugh about something, and we'd talk a little while, and maybe someone would laugh and say, "You see so-and-so, his cartridge belt was on fire," or he got his canteen shot off, or they shot his helmet off, or he got the rifle shot out of his hand, and how funny it was. They'd laugh about him, see. They'd try to make jokes and have some kind of humor out of it. And we usually talked of home and girls and shop. We talked of the home and the girls we left behind or wanted to find, and the Japanese. That's usually what we talked about.
When you were fighting, in the middle of a fight, what was going through your mind?
Oh, I've done a lot of praying. There's no atheists in foxholes that I ever found. And you catch yourself promise the Lord a lot of things if you can survive. You don't want to die. I didn't want to die. And you have to keep some kind of coolness in your head. Frighten people to do funny things. And you have to control yourself some way. You got to bring about some kind of calmness in you to keep it going, and so you don't make mistakes. You don't get to make very many, you know. And we were well trained, we had good weapons. And when you were in combat or in a firefight, we attacked it. We moved forward. Continually, we was trying to move forward, always. So that's we get on their flank and roll their flank up. We was always trying to move. We was always trying to move men forward. And to do that, you got to bring the enemy under fire and try to pin him down and move 1 or 2 men at a time, 1 or 2 men, and he got to know exactly where he's going.
Mm-hmm.
He picks his spot before he gets up, and he don't expose himself over 3 seconds.
Why is this?
Well, they taught us that if a man's up running toward you, that's the enemy. If he's up running toward you, it takes 3 seconds to get a bead on him to kill him. Anything under 3 seconds, it's just snap shooting. Now, that was during World War II. I don't know what they teach today. They got automatic weapons a lot faster, but it still has to be aimed. Mm-hmm. And a man up and running toward you, and he's a weaving and a bobbing like a quarterback, you know, trying to dodge the tacklers. In order to get a bead on him to drop him, it takes 3 seconds. To get a bead on him and squeeze off around. Mm-hmm. That's what they taught us. So I suppose it takes the Japanese 3 seconds. So you don't expose yourself over 3 seconds. 1.5 to 2 seconds at most. You make short, very short moves. Mm-hmm. And when you do move, usually when you hit the deck, you drag your heels so you don't stick your heels up, because I've seen guys get their heels shot off. And you roll to the right or left, if you're possible. So the enemy sees you go down, while you roll to the right or left to get away from their far, because they sometimes are far at you after you hit the ground, mm-hmm. you know.
Because they have an idea where.
So you roll 3 or 4 or 5 rolls to right or left. Mm-hmm. Manchester writes, we were skilled blue-collar workers. That's what we were, skilled blue-collar workers. And you had to know your weapons. You had to know, at night, you could change barrels on a machine gun. At night in the darkness. You couldn't see your hand before your face. You had learned to change that blindfolded. You learned to take the bolt out. If you broke a firing pin, you changed the whole bolt. Not the firing pin. You carried spare bolts. You carried spare barrels. And you learned to change that, and you had to set the headspace. You cranked it up so, turned it on there so tight, and you backed it off so many for the headspace on the machine gun. You made up range cards in the daytime, forward your weapon in the daytime, so the tracer, you see where they was going at, like a likely valley the Japs had coming up or something. Then when your listening post told you at night where they was coming, you had clicks on that machine gun mills, and you had so many clicks to the right, so many clicks down or up would make you fire on that valley. So many clicks to the left, up or down would make you fire on another position with that machine gun. You didn't have to see. Mm-hmm. And and the mortarmen done the same thing. They had their mortars set up at night. They had range cards made for them. So many clicks this way, so many clicks that way would put their mortar shell on a road or a crossroad or a little trail or a little path. Mm-hmm. Of course, the artilleryman did, so you could defend yourself at night.
Well, where did you use these night maneuvers at?
Where did we what?
Where did you use these maneuvers at?
Where did we use them at? Mm-hmm. Every place.
In most of the battles you're in?
Usually, like on Bougainville, the jungle fighting, they had what they call a Piva trail. Mm-hmm. I suppose you could have got a Jeep up it. That's the kind of a trail it was. I imagine a Jeep could have went up it in places. It was just a trail. The other stuff was jungle. You had to cut your way through it at times. And every time at night when we dug in, there was 2 machine guns cross-firing down that road so far. Mm-hmm. Then we set grenades out that would go off when they tripwire. Then there might have been a landmine or 2 set up there. And then there was a wire strung up, communications wire with cans on them with rocks in them and stuff like that, all strung out there 50, 75 yards in front of you, because you couldn't see. And anything come through there and trip that, you knew something was out there. That was the idea to warn you. Mm-hmm. So then you had your machine guns. They could fire on this road. They'd be cross-firing. And you had barmen covering the machine guns, and you had your mortarmen set up where they could drop mortars in on the trail, one thing or another, or a river crossing or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, for all these different kind of maneuvers and all, what kind of training did you have when you first came over and then periodically during?
When I trained in the Raider Battalion in New Caledonia, I trained about everything I thought that they had. I trained in machine guns for a while. I trained in mortars. I went to school on Japanese weapons. I trained to make rubber boat landings. I trained to make landings out of submarines. They had mountains on New Caledonia. We climbed them mountains, see how fast we could climb them. We trained at night. We had night problems 2 or 3 nights a week. They keep you out to about midnight. We trained in swamps where it was so dark that you had to break a piece of phosphorus off and put it on the guy ahead of you to see it move, to follow one another. We've even been lost in them swamps there on New Caledonia, at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I even trained where we would paddle in a rubber boat so far, 2 or 3 of us, and one of us would hold the boat out over the surf, and the other 2 or 3 of us would swim in and reconnoiter the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, being born in the Midwest, I never seen the ocean until I got to California when I joined the Marine Corps. And I always imagined some big fish was about ready to swallow me when I was in that ocean swimming. I liked it, what I was doing. It was excitement and adventure, but I'd always imagined some fish was about ready to gobble me up. It never happened, but I always imagined that.
Mm-hmm. Towards the war in a whole, what you served, what was your feeling towards it?
Toward the war?
Mm-hmm.
Well, almost all the fellows I served with were volunteers. Most of us joined the Marine Corps in the summer of 42 or late in the summer of 42, the fall of 42, after high school was out in 42. We were all volunteers. And everybody that I knew hated Japanese on account of Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And then Wake Island fell, Bataan Death March, that information was out. Everybody in my family, when I joined the Marine Corps, I had an uncle. He was raised in California, knew the Japanese. And when I left home, he said, get 2 or 3 for me. He's dead now. I can remember that just as well. Everybody hated Japanese. And all the young men that I served with, we had no feeling for the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
They really, at the time that they were being killed, we didn't look on them as men like we were, or equal. I don't know whether I could have hated the Germans or the Italians as much as I hated the Japanese. I don't know. Not being in Europe, I don't know. But the feeling was that the Japanese was just an enemy to be killed. And we wouldn't have let ourselves be taken prisoner. Mm-hmm. I don't believe I wouldn't have. And that was the feelings of my buddies. I mean, that was a feeling we had. It might have changed when it come right down to it. I don't know, but we don't think we would let ourselves be taken prisoner.
Well, Mr. Weaver, your stories, I thank you for sharing them with us. And you're an incredible man. And I just, wish that this would be more known, your stories. And I thank you.
Okay.